if you can do me a favor, I need everybody to go to our server again. I put another file up on the server for you. And the name of the file is voguelayout.tiff. If you can copy that file again to your desktop, don't try to run it off the server. Do it to your, again, it's on our class partition. This voguelayout.tiff. If you can copy that to your desktop, that would be great. And then go back into Capture One. And inside of Capture One, along the tool tabs that are along the top, whatever, click on the crop tool to come into that. And inside the crop tool, you actually have an overlay tool. And again, you'll see in the overlay tool, it's interesting. Unlike all the stuff that we had in the exposure panel, you'll see that there's only two options that we've got in the overlay tool. There's the little three dots that will allow you to get rid of this tool or to clear this overlay. I'm going to go ahead and clear mine just so that you can see what the whole process is, or the question mark, which will actually take you to Capture One's website, to the online manual to actually show you what's going on in here. But here in the overlay tool, if you actually go ahead and select the overlay tool right here, I'm going to click on the file right here underneath this. I'm going to click on file. You'll see that there's a rectangle. It's got three little dots in it. If you click on that, it will open up a window for you, and it will allow you to navigate to your desktop. If you can please go to your desktop and select that voguelayout.tiff file and go ahead and open that, you will actually see it'll come into your screen right here. Now yours may not be centered the way mine is, but did you all get something in there? If you don't see it, you need to make sure that you've got this little check mark next to the word that says show turned on so that you do see it. If it's in a weird place, like let's say it's over down here somewhat, if you click on the little hand right here, it will allow you to reposition this. If it's really hard to see, you can control the opacity of the overlay right here with this slider. So if you click the slider up to 100%, it will be permanently opaque. You won't be able to see through it at all. If you click it all the way down to 0 opacity, you won't be able to see it even though you've got the check mark turned on to show it. So I'm going to put mine roughly about 50%, and you'll actually see that you do have where you can actually position this around. So does anybody not have this? You guys good? So exactly what happened? You can't get to the server? On there. Changes to your login, the way you log in at the digital app. So it's your name and your password. No, it didn't. Here, a second, give it to you really quick. Did it work, Dan? Does anybody else need the Vogue Layout? Does everybody else have it? Okay. Oh, did everybody get on the sign-in sheet? Okay. So, back in Capture One, again, go to the crop window. Under Overlay, open that up. You want to click on Show. Click on this little 3 dots right here to navigate to find that Vogue Layout file and open it. And then again, the hand will allow you to move this guy around. The opacity will make it lighter or darker so that you can sort of see what's going on here. You can scale it, so you can click on the scale and that will make the layout bigger or smaller. You can actually, the hand is the easier way to move it around, but the hand didn't always exist. They used to make you do it with these horizontal and vertical sliders. It's actually now just nicer that you can just click on it and move this guy around. So we can actually click on this, and this gives you a way to actually shoot to layout. So what we're doing here is that this is a preview. Now, when we shoot these images, it's not going to have this Vogue overlay in the image itself. This is what they call for position only. You'll hear this all the time. People talk about FPO, FPO, FPO. It means for position only, and it's a way to actually preview this so that you can say, okay, let's see, I am in trouble right here because, well, actually my price point thing is fine because I can do a white one against a black background. But look at my type, what's happening in here. I need to rechange how either beauties happens or I've got to move this card into a different place so that my copy will actually show on my image. It's just a way, again, to work that out. There's tons of people who actually, in advertising jobs all the time, you will shoot this because the advertising copy has been done before the photograph is actually done. They'll have layouts that are showing you how it should look, but they will give you, a lot of times they'll give you an Illustrator file or something like this so that you can actually go in and position something and shoot exactly to the layout the way that it's supposed to be. Does this make sense? Any questions about this? Okay, there's one last thing I want to show you guys really quickly, and it is this thing right up here. I'm going to turn off my overlay, so I'm going to uncheck show just so that we can go back to this. And the last thing I'm going to show you is this thing right here. If you look at your screen up at the very top, there's our reset button that was right here. This is our undo button and our reset button. These other two little arrows right here are strictly rotation. This is how you can actually rotate your image. So that's all these guys are. It's this next one over that I want to talk to you about, and it's this one right here. And if you click on this, you'll actually see that it puts these vaguely foreboding icons up on your image. This is actually called composition mode in Capture One. And what happens with this, I'm sure all of you guys, how many people in this room have never actually shot to Capture One? Anybody? So you guys all have a shot to it, right? And what typically always happens is that you set up your scene, you get a light going. If you're like me, you'll do a couple of meter readings to actually dial it in and get close. You get somebody to hold a card and you start shooting pictures. And you make adjustments depending on the pictures that you're reading. So you read the, you white balance your color card, and then you read the white value of the patch, and the white value says 240, and you say, okay, I need to change the exposure and bump it up a third, whatever, and you shoot another one, and you realize you went too far. It's now reading 254, so you realize you've got to back the light off, whatever, and then you do another picture, and you realize, okay, I've got the subject completely right, but I wasn't thinking about the background, and now I'm looking at the background, and the background is completely wrong. I actually need to make the background much darker, whatever, and you keep shooting, and it's like, and you go through 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever pictures to get your lighting correct. And then you start doing your shooting, right? But you end up with that 20, 30, 40, 10 pictures, right? Whatever it is. If you put on composition mode, which are these little X's right here, it's by clicking on this, it will overwrite every single file that you do. So when you shoot your very first frame, it will show you your color card, and it will show you all of that, and you make your adjustments on your power pack. When you shoot the second frame, it overwrites your first frame. So your first frame is gone forever. There is no way to recover from this. So if you use this mode, it will cut down on your wasted disk space storage, but you can never go back. Now, personally, I don't think that's a smart thing to do. for me, I will go through a whole series of steps to get into my lighting, and then when I'm actually ready to do my shoot, I will take all of those images that were my pre-light, and I will put them in the trash and leave them there. Because remember, trash is a two-step process. As long as it stays in Capture One's trash, it'll stay with you forever until you actually physically go in and throw that trash away. That's just a safer method for me. However, I do know people who actually do use this all the time, and they'll actually just, because they don't want to deal with throwing shit away. They don't want the possibility that a client or a photographer, or wouldn't be a photographer, but a client would actually see test frames, stuff that they were actually using to get the lighting in. They don't want to see any of that kind of stuff. The problem with this, though, is that if you don't remember to turn this off, and you continue to do your shoot that way, at the end of your shooting, you end up with one frame. So you could shoot 500 frames, and at the end of the day, you've got one. And it's your last one. Does that make sense? So what a lot of people will do is, if they actually do use this guy, is the sort of rule of thumb that we all say about this. This is fine to use if you've got an assistant as a subject. But the minute you get the real deal in there, you turn this off. Because the problem with the real deal is that you never know when you're going to get the right thing or not. Do you guys know the really famous story about, who was it, the guy who shot Churchill? Really famous black and white photograph, Winston Churchill, cigar. Well, I'm not doing any better because I don't know who it is either. This has got to be the whole story, I bet. Yep, Karsh, they talk about doing it. It's this photograph right here. So he was given the opportunity to shoot Winston Churchill, 8x10 format camera. They gave him 2 exposures. That was it. That was the amount of time he had. 2 exposures. So Churchill sits down with his iconic cigar sticking out of his mouth. Karsh takes the first picture, loads up the second frame, gets ready to do it, it's ready to shoot it, walks over, yanks the cigar right out of his mouth and takes the second picture. And that's what he got. That may be all you have. So the idea of throwing away pictures, very dangerous thing, I think. So at any rate. Okay, so the reason you all showed up tonight, processing in Capture One. A couple of things that we need to talk about here in Capture One to begin with. I'm going to turn off my composition mode, things that are really important to us that we care about. And it's something that it's shocking to me how few people actually know that this exists, but it does exist, and this part matters. If you come up to your Edit menu right here, and you come down to your View menu instead, so not the Edit menu, but the View menu, and you come all the way down here to the bottom, you will actually see there's a thing at the very bottom called Proof Profile. And what this is doing is it is showing you the screen version, the screen image that you've actually got going on here has to do with what is actually selected in this preference right here. And you can see that in my case, and it is usually by default, yours should probably say selected recipe. Is that what yours says? Okay, that's a pretty safe one to use, but we need to talk about what this means. Do you guys have any other ones in here? Do you have any other guys in here where you can sort of see different, do you have anything else in here other than just this output recipes right here? What do you have? Go all the way down to the very bottom. Do you have any CMYK output? Yeah, so up at the top, into Proof Profile, up at the top, there's going to be a Show All. Jen, where is your Show All? Because I don't. It's all the way at the bottom. It's all the way at the very, very, very bottom. So down here, not Show Recommended, but there will be a Show All down here. You should have a set of CMYK profiles here. Can you guys find those? I want you to. What about you guys? Finding this? I want you to come down to the bottom. The one I want you to actually find is this US web-coded swap. If you pick that guy, you will see your image preview changes dramatically. It just got very, very, very pale. It lost a lot of contrast, and the reason it did that is that this is now emulating, this is giving you what they call a soft proof of what this image would look like if we printed this out on an offset press. So again, that would typically be a Chicago Social or a Vogue magazine or any offset press posters that they actually would put up to go around school, all of that kind of stuff. This is typically, again, would be the offset press that they would use. And you can see just how much contrast that we've lost in here. You can see the shift in saturation and color. But also look at your readout up at the top. You've actually now got CMYK readouts. So you can see if we now hover over again that the white patch or the gray patch that we normally would use to neutralize out. I've got a 55% cyan, a 44% magenta, a 50% yellow, and an 11% black, which is my K ink. So it's a readout. It's giving you a readout based on the profile that you actually have selected in there. So if you go back up to view, come down again to proof profile, and again go to the very top, selected recipe. What this will then do is it will show you profiles based on what recipe we actually have selected, which gets us to the whole processing pane. So if you click on the processing pane, do you guys, up here at the term at the very top that says process recipes, do you guys have any process recipes that are up here already? Are there canned ones? What do they say? Give me a name of any of them. Let me just look. Yeah, so we've got an A3 print, we don't remember that, a JPEG, and a TIFF. The TIFF Adobe RGB one, you guys have that one? It just says TIFF. It's similar to mine. Mine says 8-bit right here, but does yours just say TIFF Adobe RGB? Is that what you have? You've got that guy? If you could click on that one for me, that would be great. So, what recipes are ways that you actually want to process your file. Capture One does an extremely good job. Personally, I'll tell you this right now. We've talked about using, well, actually we don't talk about it in this class, but in the retouching class and all the other sort of more foundational ones I've talked about, most of you guys know I'm a huge believer in using smart objects in Photoshop because smart objects allow you to work virtually non-destructive in Photoshop. They also allow you to embed raw data into your file that you're using because you can, if you drag a raw file into Photoshop, well here, let's all do it really quick. Do you guys have Photoshop running? Does Photoshop even run on these machines? Okay, well with Photoshop running, if you can just grab, again, I'm just going to grab this raw file and drag it on top of Photoshop. It'll bring you into Camera Raw, so this is in Camera Raw right here. I'm going to click on this hyperlink at the very bottom to open this guy up. And in the thing that opens up, I'm going to set my color space as Adobe RGB. I'm going to set it to 8 bits per channel. I'm not going to do any resizing. I'm going to leave output sharpening off. You would never do output sharpening at this stage of the game because I have no idea what my output's going to be. I do want input sharpening here, but this doesn't allow me to do that part. But then you see this little checkbox right down here that says open in Photoshop as a smart object. If you say OK to that and then click on open object, you will see inside of Photoshop your layer has got this little weird icon that sits right down here at the bottom. And what that little icon down there tells you is this is a smart object. And what that means is if you double click on this icon to go back in, you come right back into Camera Raw and you can reprocess your file. So if you save this file, you end up embedding a version of your raw data in the file that you can process and process and process over and over and over again, which is a great thing to do. The problem that I have with this method is that I hate the way that a Camera Raw processes skin tones. And I think that's a real issue. I think it makes them really, really red. So, and there are a lot of people who agree with me. So those people instead prefer to process their files here in Capture One. And what they'll do is they will process an output file. You lose the whole smart object part, which is a drag. But you lose the whole raw data part, which is a drag. However, you can process this file over and over and over. So for instance, I could make a dark version of this file, a light version of this file, and then I could bring those into Photoshop together, layer them one on top of another, do dodging and burning that way. I can do a lot of the things that I can do with smart objects. But nonetheless, it's all built on these recipes that are sitting up here at the top. And the recipes that sit up at the top allow you also to do multiple processings of your file. So let's say, for instance, and this actually happens a lot, if you work, I have a friend, a guy who was a photo assistant of mine years ago, and he worked for J. Walter Thompson would hire him to shoot, he would be the DigitalTech to shoot Marlboro. And they still, I think, shoot this same way today, but you guys are not going to believe this. When Marlboro ads, you know the Marlboro Man cigarettes, right? When they shoot the Marlboro Man stuff, it is a team of 7 photographers go to Wyoming for a month. And they shoot every single day. And this is all to get one image. It's insane, the money that cigarettes generate, but nonetheless. So my friend's there, and he actually is the digital tech for these guys. And what J. Walter Thompson expects is they expect every single raw file. They expect every single raw file that is processed as a full-blown TIFF file. They expect every single raw file to also be processed as a small JPEG for position only. So you've got 7 photographers that are shooting every day for 30 days in a row. Do you know how much processing that ends up being? Not the kind of thing, you want to put that on auto as much as you can. And what this allows you to do is you can set up multiple recipes to process a file in a whole variety of different ways. And you can tell Capture One, you can say to Capture One, I want you to process this one raw file in all these different flavors. Does that sort of make sense? And so to do that, though, you need to build the recipes to do that. Now, you guys have already got one built, but we're going to build another one because we're going to build it from scratch. It's going to be very similar to the one that you've got because it's the one that most of us will actually use. But we're going to go through the process, no pun intended, and we're going to make a couple of versions of these guys, and then I'm going to show you how to set this up so that when you actually do process this thing out, it makes it all neat and tidy for you. It sorts stuff for you. It puts stuff into named folders for you. It does the whole 9 yards for you. It's actually really going to be amazing. All right? So even though you've got one started here, what I want you to do is come to the very bottom of the process recipe up at it's the top section. You'll see that there's it's broken down into different sections here. It's the list of recipes that are up here. It's actually the recipe, how it's actually built itself is down here. Again, this to me is something that I find absolutely maddening. There is a tab here called Process Recipes, and it's a list of all the ones that I've got, right? Then there's another tab under here that is named exactly the same fucking thing except for the S at the end of recipes. Who does that? You couldn't come up with a better way. You couldn't call it recipe list or, I don't know. I wouldn't charge a whole lot to give them advice on this, but it's just like, I look at shit like this, it's like, what do you people, there's not a fucking decent designer in the whole lot. But at any rate. So in the top part up here, I want you to click on the little plus down at the bottom, and it will give you a blank untitled recipe, and I want you to type in, and you need to be specific about this, because what does your recipe for your TIFF one say? What does it actually say? It says TIFF Adobe RGB 1998 and in parentheses 8-bit. That's actually pretty good. I like that part because at least it puts in the BitDepth part. So we are going to make a different one that's going to be somewhat similar to that. So for our recipe, I'm going to type in TIFF. And I am going to do 8-bit. And I'm going to do Adobe RGB. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to add the max character to this. So then you actually need to select, so once the recipe is selected, just hit your Enter key or your Return key, and you will see that it gets highlighted. You'll notice here And this becomes a little confusing again. I don't know that this is necessarily the smartest, in my opinion, interface design. But you'll notice that you can actually select a recipe and highlight it. But you'll also notice that there's a place for a little check mark next to these guys. I want you to uncheck any of these that are already checked other than the one that we're building right now. And again, we'll talk about why that is in just a second. So with this thing highlighted, you can now build the recipe that this thing is actually going to be. So again, right now, this is sort of a standard thing. We need to set options in here, and I'll show you exactly how that part works, because this is already set up pretty close to this. So it's going to be a TIFF file, it's going to be 8-bit, and it's going to be an Adobe RGB color space. So to do that, down in the process recipe, you want to click on the basic tab, and in the format drop-down menu, you want to actually select TIFF. But while you've got this format window open, you'll actually see all the other possible files that you can actually output out of Capture One. So in our case right here, I am going to go ahead and select TIFF for that. In the BitDepth for our drop-down menu here, I am going to select 8-bit. What is BitDepth? Light switch. A light switch has two possibilities. It can be on or it can be off. That's it, right? That's called a binary system. Bi stands for two, and it's really simple. I'm sure you've heard of binary systems, but nobody really knows what they are. But basically, it's one that's just built on two options. That's it. And light bulbs are a perfect example for that. So everybody gets this part, right? Okay, if I add another switch to this scenario, I have four possible options here for my lights. They either both can be off, they both can be on, or the left one can be off, the right one is on, or just the opposite. The left one is on, the right one is off. Those are my four options, and there's no others. That describes every possibility. Does that make sense? Everybody good on that part? If I add another switch, my options double again. Every single time I add, because I have two options, it doubles the four that existed before. So again, they can all three be off, they can all three be on, or I can have all these combinations in the middle. But every single time I add a switch, my possibilities double. So a transistor, the thing that was invented at Bell Laboratories in the 40s, actually is a switch. It's an electronic switch, but it works exactly like this. It's designed to either let current go through or to stop current, just like a light. It is absolutely no different at all. They are switches. However, in the computer world, they build your processor in your computer has billions of these switches, literally billions of them. And what they do is, in computer language to make the computer work, they say, okay, if there's current coming through and the switch is on, in this case the light would be on, we're going to assign that a value of 1. And if the switch is off, it's going to have a value of 0. And in doing that, you can actually encode your image with this gigantic, enormous string of zeros and ones, and that's how basically computers and digital graphics work. It's a very simplified version, but does that make sense to everybody, what's going on? And this is how it ultimately works. So again, binary switch, strictly zeros and ones. So again, if I add a second switch, I end up with 4 possibilities. If I add another switch, I've got 8 possibilities. If I added another switch to this, how many possibilities would I have?
16.
What? 16. So I started with 1 switch and 2 possibilities. 2 switches, I now have 4. 3 switches, I had 8. 4 switches, I get 16. What do I get with 5? 32. 6. 7. 128. 8. 256. How many tones do I have in a Photoshop image going from black to white? What's black? What's white? So how many tones do I have? 256, because 0 is a tone. That's where it comes from. 256 possibilities in an 8-bit image. Does that make sense? Are we good on this part? So it's just the number of possible tones that I get. So somebody very smart figured out that you could do in the world of photography that you could, and this is how Macintosh actually started. They were the first of the real graphics and tensor ones. They decided we can assign tones to that. If the value of the number that I get out of my switch is a 1, we're going to make that white. And if it's a 0, we're going to make that black. But then they realized that if you go to 4 possibilities, you could have black and white and 2 shades of gray. And if you went to an 8-bit image, you could have 8 possible tones of gray. Does this make sense what's going on here? This is what BitDepth is all about. It is the number of possible tones that you've actually got to describe your image. Are we good on that part? Guys, this is really critical, this whole part, because you're sitting, I mean, you have got to make the decision. Do you work in 8-bit or 16-bit? And you fucking don't even know what BitDepth is. You don't even know what those numbers mean. How can you decide that you want to do this if you have no idea what it is? So this translates into, if you look at it, it's simply the number of times you actually multiply something times 2. And in an 8-bit image, you do this 8 times, and if you do it 8 times, just like I did on my fingers, you come up with 256 tones. This is for a grayscale image. If you actually change this to an RGB image, you have 256 reds, 256 greens, and 256 blues, and if you multiply all of those together, you get 16.7 million colors. And that's what an 8-bit image contains, is 16 million colors. Can you see 16 million colors? Can the human eye see that? Not even close. So this is BitDepth in a nutshell, and this is how it works in Photoshop. Again, in grayscale, if you have a 1-bit image, you've got 1 switch. You have 2 possibilities, black or gray. By the time we get up to an 8-bit image right here, we've got 256. If you go up to a 16-bit image, you've got 65,000 shades of gray from black to white. That's why if you're working in ProPhoto, which is a gigantic color space, you've got so many more tones to describe that color space. Again, you don't have a black or white. You've just got much finer increments between those blacks and whites in a 16-bit image than you do in an 8-bit image. Does that make sense? If you look at it in color, this is where it gets staggering. In color, in an 8-bit image right here, you've got 16 million possible colors, possible tones. Possible colors. If you get down under 8-bit, you've actually got, this is million, trillion, 281 trillion colors in a 16-bit image. That's what you need to describe ProPhoto space because it's so big. Look at this down here. Photoshop can actually run in 32-bit. Can you tell? This is the number of colors that a 32-bit image has. At some point, the word Google is like, it describes a number that gets like this big. I really don't know what that number, I don't know how to say what that number is. Just one gigantic ass number. To show you again really quickly what that means in the real world, this is what an image would look like in 2-bit. This is a 1-bit image, 2 tones. This is that same image in 2-bit. You've now got 4 tones. Same image in 16-bit. If you look along the bottom here, you'll see that there's a step wedge that actually shows you. And you can see, even though we're in 16-bit, this may look somewhat continuous tone. It's the screen, because you can see all sorts of tearing apart in the tone range here. This would not be considered continuous tone. So again, in 4-bit, 16 possible tones, it's these 16 possible tones right here. Your image is still way too posterized and pulled apart. If you get to 8-bit, though, you have the illusion that this is not continuous tone. 8-bit was not some magic number. that Photoshop decided we're just going to do. What happened was there was a whole group of graphics people that got together and said, how many tones do you really need to give the illusion of a continuous tone black and white photograph? And they ended up with 256. And you'll see with 256 tones, the step wedge here has completely lost the divisions between it. You can't spot. It appears to be continuous tones. Does that make sense what's going on here? Same thing happens in color. This is a 1-bit image. It says 8 colors. How's that 8 colors? How many colors do you guys count on the bottom here? I see 4. I see black, red, green, and blue. Isn't that what you see? The thing is that in Photoshop, though, again, Photoshop's a math world. It's not just a completely visual world like we would all love. What it really has is it's got a pure red, but it's also got a red-black. It has a pure green and a green-black, and it has a pure blue and a blue-black. All the blacks appear identical, but they're not. Mathematically speaking, they are unique. So I have 2 reds, 2 greens, and 2 blues. What's 2 times 2 times 2? 2 times 2 is what? Times 2? That's how come you have 8 colors in a 1-bit image. This is what 2 bits looks like in 64. This is, again, you can see that even in our 4-bit here, even though I've got over 4,000 colors, I've still got serious banding between all of these. These are not considered continuous tones, and you can spot the same thing. Look at how it all breaks up into here in this image. This is actually what will happen to your image. If you use ProPhoto in 8-bit and you try to do a shift of color or tone, this is what will happen to you. And if you've been really stupid and you've baked your file, then that's as good as it gets. And then this is what 8-bit looks like. And again, you can see along the bottom, I've ended up with continuous tone. So are we good on this part? All right, so that is what BitDepth is. Back in our recipe right here, we are going to select 8-bit to do this. We don't need 16-bit. We are going to leave this as uncompressed. If you click on this drop-down menu, TIFF actually allows you to do different kinds of compression. There's one of them that's missing here. It'll actually allow you now, in current systems, you can actually do JPEG compression for a TIFF file. Not everything supports it, though, so they don't offer it here. The first of the compressions right here, this LZW is lossless, meaning it will make your file smaller, but you don't lose anything in the file. The zip that's under here is actually destructive. You will lose stuff in that guy right there. For my money, I leave these uncompressed. I don't want to compress my file at all, so I'm going to just simply leave it that way. The ICC profile that we are embedding in here is where you actually pick the color space that we are actually working for. Now you'll see when I click on that drop down right here, I get Adobe RGB and sRGB color space. However, if you click on Show All, it will open up all the profiles that are available to your computer. Now I'm going to have different ones than you guys have depending on what I have installed on my computer. So you can actually make you can make a recipe that would actually output to a specific printer if you wanted to, which is how we were actually going to do conversions for CMYK. So that's basically what's going on here. But at the very least, you guys should have some, if we come down to the bottom down here, you should have a whole series of CMYK profiles that are down here. You should also, somewhere here in the middle, have a whole series of Adobe ones that are right here. This is where my Adobe RGB ones are. There's another, I've got a second copy of one in here. There, I think, is going to be a ProPhoto one down here. ProPhoto is right here. sRGB will be down at the bottom. sRGB right here, this is a 2.0. There's several sRGB color spaces in here. So you have this whole assortment that are available to you. But in our case, again, we're going to stick with the Adobe RGB one. I do not want to do my embedded camera profile one. I do want to do this Adobe RGB because that's what's listed in my recipe. In terms of the resolution, it does not really matter here what resolution you actually stick into this guy. It's not going to change that part for you in terms of how this goes photos, again, you're simply saying how many, the size that you want of your pixel. You're not changing the number of pixels itself. However, in scale, you can change the number of pixels. So in scale, you have options. You can actually do scale. You can come in and say width, and you can actually say, I want this process recipe to give me images that are 5 inches wide. If I just selected width and put in 5 inches. Or you can say I want a height that's actually 5 inches in height or 6 inches in height. You can change any of that. This recipe then will process your file and it will give it to you scaled at 5 inches for your width or for your height. You've got all of these other options that you can actually do on here. In my case for this, again, it's going to be a master recipe for most of my files. I'm going to leave this at fixed. You can upscale and downscale your image at this stage of the game. So if you do it at 100%, it will give you a 1-to-1. For every pixel you have on your sensor, it will give you a pixel in your image. You can downsample though here as well. So let's say that you only wanted your image to be a quarter of what it could possibly be. You could put in 25%. You can actually downsample as much as you want. This is also a place that you can upsample. So if you type in 250 here, what it's going to do is it's going to, do you guys know the whole menu in Photoshop where you can actually say image size and you can say you want to resample and make it really big or you want to resample and make it really small? That's exactly what we're talking about here. There's a limit to it here though. If you actually try to type in 251, you will see that it gets flagged in red. The maximum you can enlarge an image here is 250%. Again, I'm a firm believer that if you are going to process this out and take it into Photoshop, you're better off doing your upsampling on a raw file than you are on a baked TIFF file. So you're better off doing your upsampling here as opposed to leaving this at 100%, bringing it into Photoshop and doing your upsampling there. Does that make sense to everyone? Because again, you're doing it to the raw data here, much better in terms of that. And then finally down here at the bottom of this, it says open with. If you click on this drop-down menu, you will see that it gives you a list of applications that it can open the file in as soon as it's been processed. So once it's been processed, you can actually say, okay, I want you to open this up in Adobe 2018. And the reason people will do this is it's a quick check. So once the file processes, the minute the processing is done, it gives a flag and says, open this up in the Adobe Photoshop, and it'll open up in Adobe Photoshop right away, and you can actually check and see the file and make sure that nothing went wrong in your processing. However, there's a liability in using this, because people do this all the time, especially DigitalTechs. You are charged with processing 1,000 files overnight. If you set this up to go ahead and you do your whole list of 1,000 files and you say open them all up in Photoshop, what will end up happening is that it'll end up opening the first 50 of them, and then you will completely run out of scratch disk space. Your computer will lock up, and it will not process the other 400, or the other, what did I say, 1,000 files? Yeah, the other 950 files that you thought were going to be processed in the morning, that you expected to have processed in the morning, that the photographer you're working for expected to have processed in the morning, will not be processed in the morning because you had this opening it up in Photoshop and it's trying to open every single file. And then they're going to get really pissed at you and they know you don't know what you're doing and they're going to fire you and you're never going to work there again. And you always get one chance, but you never get more than one chance. You all know that to be true, and your life is ruined, and you just start drinking and your life is, well, then it gets better because at least you're feeling somewhat better, and then you find love and your lover has got more money than God, and you say, fuck this photography thing, I really didn't want to do it anyway, and they take you to Bali and you live great for the whole rest of your life. And if that happens, could you please send me a plane ticket to visit just once or twice? Just not, I don't have to live with you, I just come say hi for a week. You know, do some mushrooms and go home. Okay, so if you don't want that to happen, turn this back to none so that it doesn't do that. So this process recipe now, for the most part, has been fixed, but there's a couple of other things that I want to talk about really quickly that have to do with this. And the next one is the next tab over, the File tab over. In the File tab over, it will actually allow you to kick these out to different locations. So you can say to a specific recipe, I want you to put this file in a specific place. My strong encouragement to you is to actually leave it in the output location. Remember, when we built a session in Photoshop, there's a folder that says output folder, and that's for the most part usually where you want that stuff to go. The reason you might want to change this, though, is that let's say that you are working every single day. You're working in a studio, and every single day it's all for the same client, but they wanted a separate session for every single day. However, they want all the output files, everything to be put all in just one place, so that they can just grab the output folder and leave. This would allow you to dedicate a completely different place to put this output file. So you can click on the drop-down menu here, and it'll give you the options to actually choose a different place to put this. So you can actually say, I want to select a folder, and you can put it someplace else. My suggestion to you, though, unless you get given those specific instructions, is to not do that. The subname right here allows you to actually append a name to the output file itself when the file is generated on this recipe only. This can get really confusing, so I'm going to suggest that right now, unless you have a really compelling reason to do this, you don't do that this way, because what it'll do is it'll add it'll add anything you want to, but it's recipe specific. So if you go to a different recipe that doesn't have this in there, the naming convention of your files gets disrupted. So one of your recipes is actually adding this name, but another recipe is not adding the name, and then there's supposed to be different versions of the same file, and that's just really, really, really bad file management. So I'm just going to suggest that part out there. However, the next thing down, and this is the game changer and the thing that, again, if you don't get anything from this whole output part, this is definitely the one you want to do right here. You need to type in a name for a subfolder, because what this will do is, when we go ahead and process out our files, this recipe is going to create a folder inside our output folder, and it's going to name it with whatever we type in here. So what we are going to type in here is TIFF. I need everybody to do this with me. 8-bit OWRGB. And that's what we're going to leave in here. You do not need to check on this, create thumbnails on save. Then the last part down here is you can actually see in here, again, in this part right here, we can actually have output. This is just telling us where our actual destination part is. You can see that it'll give you actually the sample path of where this is actually going. So I'm going to click on this to see if I can get this actual sample part to come up. We'll see where this whole part goes. If you continue to go down in our scale down in here into output naming, in this output naming, you remember I talked to you about this subname up here? That's what this icon right here could be. And again, in most cases, you don't want this to be a part of this recipe that exists up here. But the naming convention here works exactly the way the naming convention works for all the files that we've done before. This is the way it works when you're actually doing the camera part. This is the way that it works when you're actually doing renaming. This is the exact same way it works when you're doing image importing from your card. All the stuff that we've done here before, this naming convention is exactly the same. In the case of you guys, you probably do not have that subname on here. You probably just have image name, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Are we sort of good about where this is all going? Then finally down at the very bottom down here, you've got a thing that's actually called process summary. This will actually tell you what's going to happen. It'll tell you how big this file is going to get, so you can actually see that this file size is going to end up being 63 megabytes. How on earth is this going to be a 63 megabyte file? What size is that raw file? Isn't it a 21 megabyte raw file? You guys are fucking shooting with this camera and you don't even know what file size it is? File size on a typical Canon 5D Mark III or 5D Mark IV, 22 megabyte. What's your Sony? Probably about 22 megabytes. How on earth then, if I got a 22 megabyte file and I'm processing it out, do I get 63 megabytes? Remember, the raw file at every single pixel only has one color value. It needs two more. Those 2 more get created here in this program when you process this file. Those 2 more get created when you run a file through Camera Raw when you're bringing a file into Lightroom. That's where they pick up the 2 missing bits of information for every single pixel. Make sense? So that's why it gets big like that. Okay, so I've created this one recipe. Things sound great here. I'm loving this part. However, I want to create another recipe. So I need everybody to do this with me again. Come back over. We're going to click on another recipe right now. Again, it says untitled recipe. And in this case, we're going to call this a JPEG. And we'll call it sRGB. And we'll call it max. That again will be the resolution, the compression that we actually do on this. So again, if you click on this drop-down recipe part right here. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, guys. You can go ahead and leave that. Let's go back to our I'm going to go back to my 8 recipe guy again, because there's 2 other things that we needed that we didn't finish on doing on this guy that I want to finish doing on this. So our basic on this 8-bit TIFF, this is exactly the way I want it right here. The file part right here is exactly the way I want it, using the subfolder that's named this way. The adjustments, if you click on this, you can actually say that you want to keep, if people have been doing cropping along your images in your screen along the way, and you want those crops to be used to do this processing, you can leave this respect crop. However, in most people's cases, when you are generating master files, you do not want to crop the image in the processing phase. So you would click on Ignore Crop. This would then process out the entire image and give you the whole thing, and then you would have to crop it in Photoshop. Does that make sense? If you've done all the cropping though, and some art director said this is exactly how I want it, whatever, and you want them cropped when you process them out, I would go ahead then add this respect crop part on here. But in my case, I'm going to put on ignore, and then output sharpening, and you'll notice here it is all output sharpening. Again, you probably don't, this is not input sharpening, that's on by default, but this is output sharpening. You probably do not want to do this because you do not know what this file is going to be output as. So again, if I'm generating a master file and I want to be able to print it for my portfolio, so I want to be able to make an 11 by 14 inkjet print, but I also want to be able to use that master file to generate a file to go on my website. Are those going to have the same output sharpening? No, they're not even going to be the same size file. My file that I use to print is going to be giant. It'll be as big as I can get it, and I'll have to sharpen that for a print that would be 8.5 by or 11 by 14. But then the sharpening that I use for a smaller image that's going to be like this size on my screen, that is a completely different issue. If I set my output sharpening here, which one am I going to use? So again, it locks you down. You don't want to do that. You want to keep your master file so that you can repurpose it for anything. Somebody comes along and says, God, I love that image. I want to make a billboard out of it. Oh, sorry, I've got to do all the retouching and rebuild the whole image again because I built the output sharpening into it. Oh, I'm an idiot. No, you're not. You've just been in Bali too long eating. Never mind. So anyway, I'm going to turn the output sharpening part of this on. So the next thing over metadata, this is where you can actually include your copyright information, which I would include in all of this. You can see all the things that you can actually put into metadata. Again, the camera metadata, I would want that part to be in there, other metadata in here. All of this is controlled in the metadata panel, which we haven't gotten to, but we will talk about it in a different time. But you can do color rating tags. You can say, yes, I want this stuff in, or no, I don't want my GPS coordinates in. If you are actually, and you guys should know this part right now, when you guys actually do shoot something, how much information, you put in copyright information. Do most of you guys put in copyright information on the raw stuff that you shoot? Do you put your physical address in that copyright information? Why not? What?
I'm not sure. I just always just like the basic.
Okay, well, anybody else? So you wouldn't hesitate to put your physical address in the metadata of one of your files? Why would you hesitate? Exactly. You don't want people to know where you live. I see your picture on your cute little website, and I'm some creepy-ass stalker guy, and I'm really into, you know, girls with glasses. And I think, wow, I wonder if I can find this girl, right? and I open up your JPEG, which has all of your metadata in it. You guys should know this. Your JPEGs have embed all the metadata, and it's got your address, big as life, with your phone number and your, you know, your password, you know, whatever you put in there. It's got all that shit in there, and I come in, no. Do not want to do that. Same thing with putting your GPS metadata in there as computers, certainly with your phone. All your phones are tagging those images with your GPS coordinates. You really need to worry about that shit. And that goes for everybody. Guys, girls, straight, gay, I don't care what you are. That is creepy shit. And you do not want that in there, in my opinion. So I'm just going to throw that one out there. I will get off of my high horse now. And then the last thing, watermarking. You actually can add a watermark. If you are concerned about sending your images out to somebody that you're nervous about them stealing your imagery. Now, my suggestion is that you, instead of watermarking your image, you simply give them something that's so small they can't really use it. They can see it, but they can't really use it. So basically a screen preview. If you've got an image that's 500 pixels by 500 pixels, somebody can put it on an Instagram page. Somebody might be able to get away with a small image on their website, but they can't print it. They're never going to be able to really sell it to anybody. They're not going to really be able to. That would, in my opinion, be a better move in doing all of this, but it doesn't have to be. You can actually watermark your image. So to do the watermarking, go ahead and click on the watermarking tab. In the drop-down menu right here, you can actually do text. And when you do text, it'll actually open up another window for you, and you can actually type in the text you want to be watermarked. So I'm going to click on the text icon right here. If you hold down your Option key and hit the letter G, it will put in the copyright symbol, and then again, you can just type in your name. In terms of what you've actually got in here, you can actually scale this differently, so you can do it by pixels or by points. The reason they have points in here is this is the way most people do font work, is they will actually change it here. So then again, you can also change the font that you would do this with. So if you don't like this, if you don't want to do it with whatever font it's actually picked this guy with. I have no idea, but let's say you want to do chalkboard instead because you're really into giving people the impression that you're a 4-year-old. You could actually click on chalkboard. You can also, again, use the size scaling here to make it, this is smaller, or you can make it really big. In terms of that, you can use opacity to actually change so that you can actually narrow it down so people can still see the images underneath. So that's basically what's going on in this whole situation right here, to be able to do that, to actually watermark the image. That's for text. If you go to image, the one that actually goes underneath it, you can actually do this with an image as well. Now, a lot of people want to know how to do this, so I'm going to show you guys how to do this. You can use anything to watermark an image. So if you've got a logo, you could actually bring it in here. But there are clients that if you have actually used in overlay, remember we did the whole Vogue part in overlay to actually see this part? There are clients that are going to want actually a copy of that showing exactly the positioning of the type that actually happened. However, when you use overlay and you process a file out, that overlay does not get processed into your file. If you need a version of it that is in your file, this is how you do it. You do it as a watermark. So again, you can click on the little 3 dots, navigate to the Vogue layout that we used, open this guy up. You'll actually see it sits right here. Again, you can scale this up. You can actually then move it around, so you can slide it over a little bit, bring it down a little bit. You see where this is all going. If you use this in your recipe, this will actually get burned into every single file that this recipe is used for. Does this make sense? So, in my case, I would never do it in a standard master recipe like this, but I could easily make a recipe and in the recipe name say includes watermark or includes FPO for position only. And you could build a recipe that just always had this checked. Does this make sense? Are we good on this part? In my case, I'm going to hit none on this, because I'm not going to watermark it. So that's our whole 8-bit TIFF recipe that we've actually enabled, and everything has gone through that part right now. Again, if I go back to the basic and you can see, sort of see what it looks like, this is the guy that we're going to make. That's the what I'm going to do for my recipe. If you go down to your untitled recipe, I'm going to, let's say I created it by mistake, but I don't want it. You can actually click on the minus, and it will actually get rid of it. Then again, I'm going to do another new blank recipe, and in this new blank recipe, I'm going to call this JPEG. I'm going to name mine Max first because I've already got another one of these and it's not letting me build it if I name it exactly the same thing. And then I'm going to do sRGB. And I'm going to go ahead now again and hit the return key, and you can see this has now been highlighted. Now this recipe is left over from the one I built for the TIFF before it. We need to change this now. I'm going to click on my drop-down menu and I'm going to go to JPEG. You'll notice when you do JPEG, you lose the bit depth. Why is that? JPEG by definition has to be an 8-bit image. You can't have a 16-bit JPEG. In terms of the quality, remember I said this is going to be max. My quality is set here to max 100. It's an arbitrary scale. If you crank this down to 50, this would be half of the quality of a JPEG. Again, JPEG simply makes it smaller. We're making the image smaller and smaller and smaller, but we're also sacrificing the range of color that it can actually have. So that's what this scale slider is. I'm going to change my ICC profile from Adobe RGB to sRGB. Again, I'm going to leave my resolution unchecked. I'm not changed. I'm going to leave it at a fixed scale, and I'm going to leave it at 100%. I'm going to say do not open this with anybody. I am going to then click on my File tab, and in this subfolder, I'm going to put in this name, JPEG Max. sRGB. I'm going to check my adjustments again. I am going to ignore the crop. I am going to leave no, I'm not going to do any output sharpening here at this stage of the game. On my metadata, I'm just going to do everything in there, even though I know it's going to give them my GPS part. I'm not going to watermark this guy either. Now I've actually got two recipes, and you'll notice that there is a check mark in both of these guys right now. And what that is now telling Photoshop, or not Photoshop, Capture One that I want to do is, it's going to say that I want you to process any file that I do that's set up like this two different ways. I want you to process this as a TIFF 8-bit, but I also want a JPEG version of this. We're going to do one more version of this guy. So again, I'm going to add one more recipe to this. I'm going to click on this to say untitled recipe. And in this one, I am actually going to do a we're going to do it as a TIFF. CMYK swap SWOP, and then I can't remember the last part of it. I think it's version 2. And that's going to be a recipe that I'm actually going to build right now. So again, double click on this, or just simply click on this to actually select the recipe. In my drop down menu here, I am going to leave it as an 8-bit. I would probably, actually I'm going to add 8-bit to this. And then again, select the entire recipe along with the check mark to build it. It's going to be a TIFF file. It's actually going to be 8-bit. I'm not going to compress this. In my ICC drop-down menu, I'm going to actually say show all. Click on it again, scroll down to the very bottom. That's where usually they stick all your CMYK profiles. And you can see it's this web-coded swap right here. This is the one that I'm going to pick. I would probably rename that web-coded just so that I knew what that part was. You can see how pale this guy's actually gotten right now. Again, the reason this is showing me this right now is because the recipe that I have selected has got this in it. It's using this profile. Again, I'm going to select on my file, and in the subfolder name, I'm going to do this my TIFF CMYK swap. Eight-bit. That's going to be that part. In my adjustments, I am going to ignore the crop. In my metadata, I'm going to turn off my GPS, and I'm not going to watermark this guy. So now I've got 3 recipes that I've actually built on this. But now look what happens. If you click on the 8-bit, look at the change in color here. We also get RGB readouts. If you go back to the CMYK one, we now have got CMYK readouts. And that is because at the bottom of the view menu right here in your proof profile, you are saying that you want the selected recipe to be the soft proofing that we actually see. Does that make sense to everyone? Are we good on this part? Okay. Finally, we have got 3 check marks here. I've got all 3 of the recipes that I made. I'm going to leave all 3 of those checked. I'm going to go ahead and select the 8-bit guy. It doesn't matter which one you select to do this. As a matter of fact, you don't have to have any of these selected to actually do this. What the check marks indicate is what processing you really want done. Make sense? So I'm going to take 2 files. I'm going to do this top file right here. I'm going to hold down the control key. I'm going to click on this next one down here. We're going to process 2 files. But I want to show you the last thing here first, and it's this. It's the same. It's the processing icon, but there's 3 little ones of it. If you click on this, this is actually your processing queue, and the processing queue becomes critical to us. We'll see if we can get here before it processes these all out, and I'll show you why this thing becomes critical to us. What most digital techs will do is the day is going on, if they know they need to do a lot of processing, and this happens pretty much to everybody now, they will process while people are actually shooting. However, they will not process during the actual capturing event. When you're shooting tethered and you're trying to write files, you do not want your resources taken up with trying to process files. So what assistants and digital techs will do is they will develop this queue, and again, because they can be processing hundreds of files, and this queue, it's just a list of everything that's being processed, and as something gets processed, it goes off the queue and the whole queue goes up. So it's just a list. You can pause that list. So what would happen is you would process, you'd be processing until a photographer is ready to shoot, and then you would hit stop. They would do all of their shooting. Again, your queue doesn't change, and then the minute they finish shooting, you click on start processing again, and it will start the whole order again. And it's just a way to shorten your day. Make sense? All right, so I'm going to go back to the processing part right here. I just wanted to show you what that guys was. I've got 3 check marks here, which are telling me it's going to process both of these files, 3 different flavors, 3 different versions of it. Finally, come down to the processing summary at the bottom, and this is where you actually start to activate this. You click on this bottom part to actually kick this out and to go ahead and do it. So if you click on process now and then immediately go to your queue, you will see that it's actually processing both of these files in multiple different ways. So you can hit stop here, which would then halt the processing, free up your computer to actually give its resources to shooting captured, and then simply click start again, and it will continue to go through that whole process part of it. So it's going through the whole first processing of the top one right here. I think your all's machines are a little bit faster. You've got a little bit faster processors in here. So are you guys already done? Yeah, yours goes pretty quick. You can see that mine is not, again, not the same processor. You get a little countdown timer right here telling you how long this guy is ultimately going to take. I'm going to go back into my queue here because it'll still show it to me right here. And finally, this whole thing is done. Then in your output location, go to output location drop down and simply click on this little arrow in terms of this. It'll take you to your output folder for the session. And in the output folder for the session, you will see that you have 3 subfolders that were built for you by your recipes. You've got the one that's got the JPEGs in it. You've got the one that's got the 8-bit TIFFs in it. And then you've got the CMYK TIFF ones that are sitting right here. And this is unlimited. Are we good on that part? Okay, finally we got one last thing to... Are there any questions about this part? Shoot.
Since you selected multiple variants?
Yes, go ahead and say, yeah, I would actually, you really shouldn't have this showing you again, but just go ahead and click on all. It's asking you if you want to process all these guys, and you do. All right, does this make sense what's going on here? We good on this part? Okay, one last thing I want to show you. Let's actually go back in there again one more time. Actually, do me a favor. Grab all three of those in your output folder. Grab all three of those guys and throw all of them away. You leave your output folder the way it is. I just want to undo this part. I need to make sure that you guys understand what's really going on in here. So go back into Capture One and now into, again, your process folder here in the terms of the process recipes, the list. I want you to uncheck the TIFF, both of them. Uncheck both of those TIFFs, but I want you to leave this one selected, this 8-bit TIFF. And you can see that it's actually unchecked. And you see this red flag that's happening right down here? This red flag that's happening right down here is saying, okay, we know you have this thing selected, but you have not checked it. So when this thing is going to, if you click on process to kick this out right now, it is only going to do this JPEG one because the JPEG one is the only one that is checked. Does that make sense? Another one that happens all the time, and this is the first one, this is how they'll know you really don't know what you're doing. Uncheck the JPEG guy right here. And you will notice now that it actually has down here that, again, you get this thing in warning right here. Go ahead and click on the process button. And you'll get this warning that comes up and says you need to enable at least one of your recipes. You're saying that you want to process it, but you haven't told us what recipe you want to process this as being. So I'm going to say OK to that, and then go ahead, leave TIFF selected, but click on your JPEG sRGB. And now again, you get this warning down here saying, well, you've selected this TIFF, but that's not what you're asking us. That's not what you're processing out. Go ahead and click on process, and again, it says the selected recipe will not be used because it is not enabled. However, if you hit continue, it will process the JPEG. So you'll see, I'm going to let just this one, it's going to do both of them because I've got two selected. And then again, I'm going to click on to go see my output location, and you'll see it only did the JPEG Max sRGB ones, even though this guy was selected right here. This whole thing was outlined right here, but it's all about the check marks. The highlights on this are only what you need to adjust the recipe. The only time you highlight these things is when you're trying to make changes in the recipe itself. Selecting it alone means nothing. Are we good on this? Okay, finally, the last thing that I want to show you guys really quickly is I want to go back into I'm going to go back into the library. I'm simply going to click on one of these guys. I'm not going to click on, I'm going to click on this guy right here. And then I want to do a select all. I'm going to hold down the, it's the same keyboard shortcut everywhere. It's Command A will select everybody. If you can't remember that, it's actually up to the edit menu. Come down and it'll have select all, Command A. Or you can select the very top image, scroll all the way down to the bottom and select the bottom image. It'll select everyone in between. If you hold down the the Command key, it will let you do discontinuous selections. But this is true of every program in in Apple's world. But now I want you to come up to the File menu, and I want you to come down to oh, keep going down, sorry. Make Web Contact Sheet. Now, there's a feature that's very similar in Lightroom to this, but basically what this will allow you to do is to create a really fast, down and dirty website, and a lot of people use this to actually use this to send a client previews. So instead of sending somebody every one of your raw files, they will build a quick website contact sheet. They will post that up to a server like GoDaddy, or I don't know if you guys do any other services, whatever. But then you get a web link from that, and it'll allow a client to log in to this website, look at the images, figure out which one that they like, and actually then say, oh, I like this one, whatever. And it's just a much faster, smaller way of doing it. and it's really quick and it looks good. So again, this will be a title up here. Just put in any title right now. You'll see what it looks like. I'm just going to put in Verser. You could put in a description. You could add copyrights. You could do all of that kind of stuff. In terms of the capture here, again, you can say how you want them named. I would actually leave them as the name that they actually are done here. You can actually size your thumbnails up. You can do all sorts of things here, but at the end of the day, this is going to create this contact sheet. It'll ask you where you want to put it. I'm going to go ahead and leave mine to put out on my contact sheet onto my desktop, and I'm simply going to, you can change the outlooks of these. You can do, there's 4 options. You have a classic light, which just puts it on a lighter background. You have a full screen dark, which puts thumbnails at the bottom. That's the one I'm going to do for this guy. And simply hit export. It'll kick through all of that. It'll actually make it extremely fast, and then it'll actually open it up. This is now opened up in a browser, and you can actually see, you can actually step through these guys. If you go into your Finder really quick and go to your desktop, you will actually see there is a folder in here called Contact Sheet, and in that contact sheet is a full-blown developed website, complete with the index HTML. These are your photos that are in here, the previews and the thumbnails, and these are the scripts that it's used to actually make this thing run. And it's insane. Single best way there is to actually show work like that. Does this make sense? Are there questions about this? Again, this is great because you just upload this. It's so fast. You built it so fast. Now, personally, myself, I would not let any photographer know that you know this trick. I would simply say to them, you know, I can build you a website of all your previews overnight. It'll take me 5 or 6 hours to do, and I'll only charge you double my day rate. So again, because I'm working all night, I'm working for you for $450, but the website, $900. You can't ask for anything cheaper than that, and you'll love it. And they'll go, okay. And we're done. Are there questions about this? All right, I'll see you. We got to get out of here. I'll see you guys next week.